What's going on, YouTube, and welcome to Goal Line Hockey. Today we are going to be talking about the situation around the NHL and the NBA. We don't really see a lot of crossover between these two franchise, well, really the two brands as a whole in sports. There is such a huge gap between the NBA and the NHL, but things like what we saw the other day are a sign of hope for the NHL and just hockey in general. We're going to discuss that here in today's video. So, the other day, this was something that kind of came up out of nowhere, and it's been talked about internally, I think, in the NHL, but now it's to the point where we have actual NBA players like Kevin Durant coming out and talking about it. So I figured let's dive into this topic a little bit because there's a lot to unpack here. So the other night, we were hearing discussions about how the NBA and the way they do load management and the prima donna mindset of the stars of the NBA, it is a very different league than the NHL. And starting off with the money side of things, you make a lot more money being a bench player in the NBA than some of the best stars in the National Hockey League. That's a fact. You look at the NFL, same thing, right? You have backup quarterbacks making as much as Connor McDavid. So when you put things together and you put things into perspective, it really changes the way the culture around the sport kind of is. The NHL, a lot of the players in the NHL, I would say 90% of NHL players, if not even more than that, the culture is much more old school in the sense that you have guys that you're hurt during the playoffs or something like that, but they push through those injuries to win the Stanley Cup. And then, what's that famous thing when we're at the end of June, right, heading into July, and we find out the guys that were basically lifting the cup with one arm that actually worked. Like, they busted their shoulder in the first round of the playoffs. Heck, they might have even busted it in March, but they just kept playing through it up until winning the Stanley Cup for six to 8 weeks of busted up shoulders, Stanley Cup finals, Stanley Cup playoffs, even the run to the playoffs, right? All that stuff. You don't see that in the NBA. You don't really see that in the NFL. Now, I would argue the NFL is different too in the sense that there's a lot of contact like the NHL, but they also have a lot more time off in between games and things like that. It's just different. In the NBA, you can make the argument, well, if you have a busted up thumb, like it's hard to throw the ball and whatever. You could get into that whole mindset. I understand that. But we have players like McDavid with basically a broken wrist or a bruised wrist who still play. So what's the difference there? It comes back to what I talked about. It's culture. The culture in hockey is much different than most sports. And that's why hockey tends to gravitate to a different audience, right? This isn't always the case, and I want to preface that. But hockey tends to culminate better with certain areas of. I'm going to give you two examples. In the northeastern United States and western Canada. Now, again, I preface that because we have some great markets in Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, right? In the US, we have some great spots in the Midwest who are very much in line with this, and we'll get to that. Out in California, in Texas, some really good hockey markets. But there's a certain culture about certain areas in the region, like Western Canada, right? The Oilers, the Flames, some of the biggest fan bases in the league. They're oil workers or they're farmers, blue collar jobs. Why in the Northeast? New York, Philly, Boston, Pittsburgh. There's no coincidence that there is a great cultural connection between hockey and blue collar or farmer work. And like I said, this isn't always the case, but they tend to align well together. And that's kind of what we're seeing the difference between the NBA and hockey here, going back to injuries, right? Injuries, load management. You don't see NHL players taking off games because this I need off for 2 weeks just because I need a mental health break. You don't see NHL players doing that much. Now there is also the other side of the extreme where they never take off, and maybe they should take off 10 games so their overall health when they retire from the game could be better. There is a happy medium here, right? Not everything is black and white, but there's definitely the more of the these guys work through the pain, they work through the struggle, while in other sports like the NBA, they definitely don't. And I wanted to start off with this part of the video, so if you don't really understand, there is definitely that culture aspect to it that's kind of playing into what led to Kevin Durant saying what he said. So there was, I guess, a reporter, and there was something on Twitter. I know we're going to Twitter, we're going to X here. But basically, what they were saying is, my genuine question to you, KD, as a key man in the arena, what solution do you propose to fix this? The NBA gives you all the freedom, on top of millions of dollars, to play where and when you want and control the entire narrative, perhaps a little too much. Superstars and the players who basically he continues to go on kind of talking about how, like, you have full control over everything. You make millions upon millions of dollars. That's not even including sponsorships and advertising revenue that you make. When people come to a basketball game, they want to see the stars. They want to, if they're paying for a ticket, they want to see Kevin Durant there, right? If they're going to a Suns game in Phoenix, they want to see Kevin Durant. They go to an Edmonton Oilers hockey game. They want to see Connor McDavid. You go to Pittsburgh. You want to take a road trip to watch a team. Like, if I go on a road trip to Pittsburgh, that's one of my plans before Crosby retires. I want to watch Crosby play in Pittsburgh. I have not done that. Just a few examples like that, right? So when you have this situation where you have KD not playing in games or not doing certain things because he just doesn't feel like it, and then fans show up expecting him to be there, paying top dollar for tickets, and he's not even playing, the best talent that they could be putting out there, the best product they could be putting out there, isn't out there, well, then it kind of leads to that point where, like, yeah, technically, like, people aren't obligated to a player being out on the court, but also that player kind of has the luxury of being in the sport that they're in, and they get paid millions of dollars. Yes, but they do face a lot of criticism. There is no secret to their life, right? Everything is out there. There is no privacy. So there is a balance to those things, right? And the way Kevin Durant answered this is kind of interesting here too. And that's really what we need to get to kind of round things home here. So Kevin Durant responded to that interviewer, right, asking him that question on Twitter. He said, for the betterment of your mental health and just overall well-being, just don't watch the NBA. Hockey is right there, and they play with that aggression that you may like. They also rarely get traded or go to new teams in free agency. I disagree with that, but we'll get to that. So the loyalty aspect is there. Hope that helps. And there's a couple of other random people on X that were kind of contacting him saying, biggest trades in hockey the last 5 decades just happened recently. And yeah, they play with emotion, play through injuries, unlike the prima donna NBA players, like we talked about earlier. LeBron James couldn't even suit up for all his start pictures, but made sure he was in the picture itself, even though he wasn't there. Yeah, y'all ain't fun to watch. But people are picking up on this, right? And that's the thing, especially as the price of these tickets and the price of all this stuff continues to go up, the product you should be putting out there should be your best foot forward. And again, there is the happy medium to this. Players should not be sacrificing their lives just so somebody could sit there and watch them eating popcorn and hot dogs, right? There is a happy medium here. But don't be surprised when people start turning their back on you because they say, I just spent $800 on these tickets and they're not even playing their best. They're not even trying. People notice that. And as an Islander fan from New York, I can say that every time I watch certain players, you notice he's not always the top goal scorer. He's not scoring goals every game. He's not always the guy that's laying the biggest hits, but you could just tell the effort's there. And that's why I think, like, I have Casey Cizikas' jersey. He's been on the Islanders for over a decade. Casey Cizikas is not a New York Islander superstar. Most people know his name just because he's been around forever. But the reason people know, like me, is because you see the effort every game. The way he back checks, the way he blocks shots, the way he hits. Even when nobody was looking, he went to lay that hit. Or to make that little extra move. Or that little thing that the average person might not realize, but you notice the effort every single shift. And that's why he's a fan favorite, because enough people that watch the Islanders understand the impact that Casey Zizekas has on the team. That's just one example. You go across the entire National Hockey League, you can name 15 examples on each team individually. And it's not always their best player. So that's why when we hear about this stuff going back to KD, like, when you're not giving your full effort and people are paying top dollar for these things, for merchandise, for jerseys, for even a $10 hot dog. Here I am paying a $10 hot dog, $800 for tickets, and this guy's not even going to try. Like, you're not even putting the best product that you can out there. People are going to pick up. People are noticing. People are waking up to it. And the NBA, I wouldn't say they're really worried about the NHL, because there is such a huge gap between the NHL and the NBA in terms of revenue and everything like that. But we've seen over the years how quickly Major League Baseball was the top of the top of the heap for all things American sports. That is no longer the case. And if the NBA isn't careful, we're seeing right now, we're seeing the Four Nations, the All-Star game, like the difference between the way the NHL handled Four Nations as their kind of quote-unquote All-Star break compared to what the NBA did with the All-Star game. You need to evolve. You need to change things up. And one of the very few times in recent history where the NHL actually might have beaten the NBA for a week. Between what we're talking about here with Kevin Durant, between the load management situation and how that was the future of sports, load management and this and that. People are sick of it. They're like, no, that's not how we're going to do this. And people are letting them know. And you know what? When people stop going to games and people stop buying merchandise and things like that, that's when the real things are going to change. All this now is just talk. But are NBA fans actually going to switch over to the NHL? That's going to be the real question. And is it going to be a significant enough amount where the NBA even considers it? Probably not. In all honesty, probably not. We're not going to see a huge shift here. But this is just the first seed of doubt that people might have about other sports that might put them more toward hockey. And hopefully, hockey doesn't follow in the path of these other sports, trying to be progressive, trying to be sort of something that they're not. The grassroots of hockey are what they are. Hockey players are notorious for taking a stick to the face or a puck to the face, getting 6 to 8 stitches in their cheekbone, and then next thing you know, they're back out there 5-10 minutes later. During a regular season game, mind you, we're not talking about the Stanley Cup Finals, we're talking about a regular season game, game 61 in January or February, and they come back out there. You know why? Because they have between 10 to 20,000 fans out there watching them. So they, as their own volition, take it upon themselves to go back out there and play. Meanwhile, they could have sat out the rest of the game. They could have jumped in the cold ice bath early in the first, second period. And there's 10 minutes left in the game. Why am I going to show up for 2 minutes, right? Why am I going to get stitched up just to show up for the last shift? Players do that. And like I said in the beginning of this video, what does that all come back to? What does this all culminate to? It's culture. And as much as I have a lot of criticisms for the culture of hockey and how a lot of people could see it as toxic and things like that, the NHL very much gatekeeps itself. But I think in this case, it's actually for the betterment of the league. And in a world where so many things are changing and evolving for what a lot of people don't think is for the better, it's nice to have that safeguard of the NHL's old school style. And I think that actually is, as much as the old-fashioned style is now becoming new again, because everything is so modern and progressive, and not even talking about politics progressive, like just in general, just modern technology and trying to focus on innovating in the future. Sometimes that actually can hurt you. And when everybody else around you is doing that for so long, it becomes stale. And now the old-fashioned style of hockey and the MLB might actually kind of be coming back into vogue just because it's different than all the other stuff that's going on. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And again, this is all my opinion and kind of from what I'm seeing from my perspective of watching hockey since I was a little kid, over 20 years now, watching hockey and just seeing how things have evolved. Because we've always talked about on this channel, even my most recent video, talking about how the NHL is behind in the other leagues. And I think this is a good step in the right direction. Seeing the four nations, as much as I have criticisms about the four nations, a lot of players don't like the four nations, as I fully understand, because so many nations were left out of it, politics wise, or even, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, like all those countries, they were all left out, right? Like there's a lot of things that are wrong with it, but they did make strides in the right direction. And when you compare it against certain leagues like the NBA over the last couple weeks, it's actually a bright spot. So that's going to do it for today, guys. Hopefully you watched this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below what you think of this situation with the NHL and kind of gatekeeping the culture. A lot of people don't like it. I'm one of the few people that does. I'm okay with the gatekeeping of the culture because that's what makes hockey what it is. Not everything has to be evolving and changing. Maybe little things here and there, but you don't have to change everything. You don't have to change the core fundamentals of the sport just to try and attract people that might not have been interested anyway. That's not always what it's about. So that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.